Should be ready now.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for starting early with us this morning at 8:15, given that both the Senate and the House has to be in session early today due to the swearing in, the inauguration. And there are lots of preparations going on outside the windows here. We're very excited. It's a big day in Annapolis. And to start us off with this meeting, we're going to address the one alcohol bill that we did not finish last time, and that is Howard County 1223. There were some questions, and those the answers to some of those questions were emailed to everyone. And so I'd like to ask at this time, do we have any further questions on that bill, which is 1223, repeal of petition of support requirement? Delegate Feldmark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is not so much a question as just a confirmation. I wanted to clarify because we had asked at the last meeting specifically about what appeared to be removing a waiver or adding a waiver for a residency requirement. And I just want to confirm with everyone, if my understanding is correct, that is not an addition, but rather a relocation. So we're not changing anything about that. It's simply moved to a different part of the statute. Is that correct?
Can we have our counsel answer that question?
Yeah.
The answer is yes. But...
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? All right. Would someone like to make a motion?
Motion to vote.
How about a second?
Second.
Very good. Abby, you can take the roll.
Senator Lamb,
Yes.
Delegate Watson,
Yes.
Senator Guzzoni, Senator Hester,
Yes.
Delegate Atterbury,
Yes.
Delegate Feldmark,
Yes.
Delegate Lamb and Guzzoni,
Yes.
Delegate Hill,
Yes.
Delegate Terraza, Delegate Wu.
Well,
Yes.
I'm here. Too.
Oh, sorry. What was that?
I'm sorry. I was looking for my mute button. Who are you talking to?
How do you vote?
Oh, me? No.
Delegate Ziegler,
Yes.
the motion passes.
Great. The next item on our agenda is the archery bill, Howard County 1523. And we did not intend to have a long discussion on this today, but basically just to find out where the sponsor is or what the sponsor is doing with some of the questions that came up. Senator Hester, did you want to talk a little bit about that?
Or I would just note that we've received a handful of questions and those answers were emailed to you. There are other questions that we have recently received, which the county is working on answering. There's also a couple of proposed amendments. Given the short nature of today's delegation hearing, I proposed a working session, informal. If anybody wants to join on Friday, the county will be available to answer any further questions. And that way we can have a shorter, more efficient conversation at next week's delegation.
Okay, so this is not an official delegation meeting. It's just if anyone has questions, they're welcome to ask them of the county who will be available on Friday. Okay. One of the thoughts, and I don't know if this makes sense or not, but I would really like the rest of you to think about it, is whether or not it makes sense to change the yardage requirements based on density, which can be translated by the tiers in Howard County, the growth tiers. And I don't know whether it makes sense or not, but basically it would be that in the western part of the county, the requirement could be as short as 50 yards in tiers 2 and 3 and 4. There is no 2. So 3 and 4. And then in tier 1, where the growth is very dense, it could remain at 150 or be 100 yards. I'd love for you guys to think about that, whether that you think that makes sense at all, but that's one way to tackle it. There are other ways. And Delegate Tarazi, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just a little confused about this process because I guess that means that then it won't be a public discussion, and I thought we would have opportunity to have a public discussion about it.
We are going to have a public discussion about it at the next meeting. I think what Senator Hester was saying is if anyone individually has questions that they want to ask the county, they are going to be available at 10 o'clock and you can call in and ask your questions. That discussion between all of us will not happen at 10 o'clock on Friday. It's just an opportunity for you to ask individual questions, and then a full discussion will happen at the next meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Any
I
other
just
comments
want-
or, go ahead, Senator Hester.
Just really quickly, since we're talking about potential changes to the bill, the other one that has been brought to my attention is the option to move from the archery approach to an increase in the sharpshooter program. That has pros and cons, but that's one of the things where I've asked the county for more information about the efficiency of that approach, given the yardage requirements and the tight spaces that we're in. So I'm hoping to get more information on that as well.
That would be just essentially more opportunities for that program, more funding, essentially more funding for that program to happen more often.
Essentially more funding, but the key thing is in these areas that we're talking about, like Dorsey Hall, Centennial, and the other tight spaces, can they actually get in there with a sharpshooter program to treat the populations of deer that may be confined to those tracts of open space?
Right. Delegate Hill.
Yeah, actually, Senator Hester just mentioned it. The suggestion that you made about altering the density would, it seems like, in that up for discussion, it would counter the whole purpose. So their point was they wanted tighter or smaller distances because of the denser areas. They wanted to be able to get in there. So.
Delegate Feldmark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for the clarification on the work session Friday. Can we live stream that as well? I mean, I know a lot of the questions that I had were based on concerns we've heard from constituents. And if that's going to be sort of the more in-depth informational piece of it, I'd like to make sure that is a public discussion as well.
It's not an official meeting of the delegation. It's simply something that the senator has set up. So I'm going to pass it off to her to ask her if she has any ideas about that.
I have no problem with live streaming the conversation. And if we can't, ideally we would use the whatever Zoom we're using now, but if it can't be, because we're not having an official meeting, I could also do it on our Zoom.
And maybe it might be helpful to get an idea of who would plan to attend that, so the sort of the numbers of people from the delegation. If you think you might be interested in attending that, can you just raise your physical hand? So that's 3. We've got 3 delegates. So that gives you some idea of how you want to proceed with that. We'll leave it up to you to figure that out. But I would also say, Delegate Feldmark, we have absolutely no problem in repeating any information, any questions. I mean, that's the purpose. The purpose is for everyone to be well informed when we actually have the discussion. So I don't think we'll be leaving the public out of that at all. The other thing I just want to quickly mention is we did hear last time about the statistics on state roads of deer that have had collision with automobiles, and just on state roads it was 600 roughly on an average over the years. So I think as much as we all have we all hear from constituents who don't want us to change anything, and I understand that. but we also have a responsibility to our citizens to protect them from bodily injury with this expanded deer population. So I just want to keep that in mind because we're probably talking well over 1,000 collisions if you include county roads. So just want to make that point. Any other issues or questions on this agenda item? Delegate Hill.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I was just going to say, Delegate Hester, that ability to attend would also depend on what time. Do you know if you're talking about morning Friday, afternoon Friday, or what are you thinking?
Now that I know who's interested, it was Delegate Hill, Delegate Feldmark, and Delegate Terraza. I'll find a time that works for everybody.
And Zabar.
And Delegate Ziegler.
Any other questions on that bill?
I have a question.
Senator Lamb.
Yeah, so is the county officially supporting this bill? I'm just trying to get a clarification there.
Yes, they were, I mean, we worked on the bill together. It's the result of 2 years of conversations with the county.
So is there a letter from the county executives?
If there isn't, we can get one.
Okay.
Well, when we have Miss Arthurs with us at the next meeting, I don't know if she is here today, but she can clarify that for us all, I think. Any other questions on this topic? Senator Lamb, would you please take over?
Pardon me, Delegate Watson, I have just one quick question. Senator Hester, would it be okay with you? I would just like to take some time today just to double check the Open Meetings Act and make sure just what the parameters for if on Friday if you aren't able to live stream and what how them it's okay to be structured. I don't think it should be an issue, but just
I'm not sure we understood you. Can you repeat that slowly and loudly?
sorry, yeah. I was saying would it be okay if I got back to I guess the delegation later today? I'd just like to take a deeper look at the Open Meetings Act and just make sure that if there is questions being asked on Friday to the county, that we're not. I guess
Sure. That's perfectly fine. I think for the purposes of your research, we're talking about 3 or 4 delegates, but you could let us know. It's not.
Of course, yeah.
You can let us know if there are any limitations for that, but it's basically an opportunity to ask questions of the county people in preparation for our meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Hester.
I just want to say I was trying to save delegation time, considering the fact that I have to be in my seat at 9 o'clock. If we just want to start delegation next Wednesday, half an hour earlier, so we can get through a really robust discussion, that's completely fine with me too.
Next week is challenging because we have Leadership Howard County at, I believe, 8:15, and then we will start our delegation meeting around 9. So we'll again be short on time. But I'm certainly willing to entertain that if we want to take a show of hands of who would prefer that we defer that discussion until the next meeting, which is next Wednesday, or who would prefer that they have some time to talk to the county people before then. Delegate Feldmark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually think the idea of a work session Friday, if we can get folks' schedules aligned, makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
I do want to request that if it aids in the live streaming and having it actually posted on the MGA website, I would request that we consider it a delegation work session, even if not everyone is attending, so that it's just seamless for the public to observe.
Are there any objections to that suggestion? We may have to appoint a chair in absentia to run the meeting, but are there any objections to that? Does our delegation administrator, would you be available to take care of that on Friday?
Yeah,
Okay.
I just wanted to say for the record, this is something that we have done. For example, we had a few delegates and myself talk to Jack Maloney about a bill on alcohol last year, you know, and over Zoom, and it really helped us move forward that bill. So it's not like this is some outrageous request.
Sure. All right, Senator Hester and Abby, would you, two of you work together to set this up and let all of the delegation members know, meet all the requirements that we would typically meet for notice, and send the Zoom link out. And those who are interested can watch the delegation members ask questions of the county in preparation for our next Wednesday meeting. Is everyone okay with that? Okay, that's the plan, and we'll hand it over to Senator Lamb.
All right, thank you. I know time is short, so we'll see what we can do in making a dent in these two bills. So next up, we have campaign finance bill. This is HOCO 7-23, candidates for village board or Columbia Council in the Village of Columbia reports the donations and contributions. We have the bill sponsor here, Delegate Peraza. Would you like to speak to the introduction of the bill briefly, and then we can open up for discussion?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Howard County HOCO 7-23 is about election transparency. It applies to villages and candidates for village board as well as CA board members. And what it does is for CA elections, it requires candidates to tell us who gave the money and how much, and tell us what they spent it on. And that's sort of the crux of the bill. I filed a similar bill last year, which also covered municipalities and other large HOAs. I was shocked to find out, really shocked to find out that there's no requirement statewide for municipalities to, so you could be running for city council and mayor, of course not Baltimore City, because Baltimore City is treated like one of the counties, but there's no requirement for them to report campaign donations and what they spent and expenditures. So I had that. I think there was some interest in those being separated out. So I separated them out this year, but still looking at possibly doing a statewide bill, at least on the municipality end. So this one just covers CA elections. And so why do we need this? Sorry about that. Why do we need this? Basically, as most of you know, CA elections are marked by low turnout, and this often means there's very little interest in investing in these elections. And so typically there's no expenditures in these elections, and sometimes, somewhere between $25 and $500. I think somebody was telling me they ran for Columbia Council / CA Board of Directors. They bought pencils and they hand them out at the village center. So that's the kind of election financing that typically happened in the past. However, 2 years ago, it became clear that much more money was being invested in local elections. I've heard accounts of somewhere between $100,000 being put into that election, somewhere between, and possibly more, could be a little bit less, but I can't give you the exact dollar amount because there's no reporting system mandate currently in existence. So, but what I can tell you is that in my village, we each received 4 mailers, and you guys know what mailers cost. I think in Wild Lake, there were 6 mailers, and this is a huge jump in funds spent on this type of election, and I believe highlights the need for more reporting requirements. So you might be wondering, why would anyone want to contribute to candidates running for election in an HOA or Columbia Association in particular? And a recent article called Columbia Influential, but little understood entity, which has a $70 million budget derived from dues of Columbia residents, has 1,100 full and part-time employees. They maintain pools and tennis centers, 100 miles of pathways. Even though it's not incorporated, if it was, it would be practically the second largest city in Maryland. And they own and manage a lot of open space, and that is part of, I think, some of the reason there was a recent investment in the election is that they do control the open space, and that controls who can develop in the rest of Columbia. So it really doesn't, from my perspective, matter who it is that's contributing. It could be anybody doing that. And so I just think we need to be careful of that. I am working on a couple of amendments to this, and so they're not quite ready yet for a vote today. And one of them, excuse me, one of them is a notwithstanding clause that I don't think you'll be particularly interested in, but basically says notwithstanding the covenants, et cetera. This would still go into effect, which I think it would, whether or not we put that in, but we've been asked to do that. Another one would say that the reporting requirement I gave for the villages was that they either had to make it available online or make the report available. And I just want to change that to and, so that both are true. And then I'm looking at independent expenditures because a lot of the villages have asked me to look at independent expenditures. I'm not sure what's going to happen with that because we're still working on it. So that's basically it. Happy to address any questions in the time we have.
Okay, so let's open up for questions. I see Delegate Hill has her hand up. Go ahead.
All right, thank you. And thank you, Delegate Terrassa, for this legislation. I think it's really important to not allow what really should be small town elections to be purchased by corporate or other large entities. So two things. Number one, the bill doesn't specify that the disclosures have to be before the election. So that, and I think that may be something, if you haven't thought about that, I would hope you would. And the second thing is that, and I think we've talked about this a little bit, filing what a candidate's disbursements are and contributions. And I know you talked about independent, but I'd like you to explain, if I'm an outside entity and I just want to spend independent money for a candidate or a slate of candidates, how, or does this in any way get at exposing the money I'm putting into this? Or is the idea that if the candidates say they've spent $10 or $100 and the public knows they're getting, mailers, that the public is supposed to presume that this must be someone, not the candidate, who's pushing for this and ask that question? Or how exactly do you see it getting at the issue that you introduced the bill to address?
Okay, so thank you for those questions. First of all, in terms of before the election, the intent is for that to happen and for it to be put in by the villages because they're supposed to establish a reporting system. But I appreciate that and, would consider an amendment to require that reporting happen before the election. But that's certainly the intent. In terms of independent expenditures, so those, somebody spends money on a mailer or et cetera. As you know, from our own elections, if somebody coordinates with you, if somebody talks to you and says, hey, I'm going to send out a mailer on your behalf, if somebody develops a website and says, okay, so what would you like to see? Or I'm working on this website. Do you have a URL or whatever you want to attach it to? Like if they're going to coordinate with you, that's considered a direct expenditure, whether it's in kind or whether it's a direct expenditure. So in terms of the last election, there was no requirement of reporting either way. So there would be no reason that there wasn't coordination in the first place. So all of those were probably, unless they just didn't tell people they were doing them, which they wouldn't have any reason not to last time. Those would have been covered as direct expenditures that would need to be reported. But in terms of independent expenditures, that is what I'm working through. It's slightly more complicated legally. So I'm working with Jared Demarinis and our attorney with the Attorney General's office in terms of how to specifically spell that out. But it isn't that part of why it's a little more complicated is that the villages have a direct relationship with candidates. So they can say, we're going to seat you or not seat you. And the way this works is if they don't report you, they can't be seated by the village. In terms of independent expenditures, it gets a little more complicated and would probably have to be enforced at a state level. So I'm still working through, happy to talk to you about that as I work on it. But I don't know if that answers your question, but I guess the bottom line is those expenditures probably would have been covered the last time. And we'll see, we're going to have to see what happens going forward if we can't get that in the legislation.
Mr. Chairman, may I follow up?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I think you just talked about coordinated, but expenditures don't have to be coordinated. And the challenge is that if I'm a registered lobby group or a registered entity, who lobbies state or local officials, I have to disclose money that I'm spending, at least above a certain amount. But these are local candidates for essentially a form of an HOH. I'm not aware, and maybe Mr. Moriarty can speak to it, or you can speak to it, that there's any, if it's not coordinated, there's no disclosure. And so I guess the question is, do you think that this bill is a good start, but there's still a gap about getting to large, uncoordinated?
Yeah, so,
Or do you think I'm missing something here about how I would address that?
right. So first of all, I am working on trying to do those independent expenditures, and we're getting closer, but I don't know what that ultimately will be, but either way, I think it's a good start. I think reporting where people got their money. I mean, the reality is, there was a lot of money flowing into the election and the likelihood of that happening going forward. So I think we need to do something, and hopefully we'll be able to add those independent expenditures either now or at some time in the future. But I do think it's a start. And like I said, those past expenditures were most likely not independent expenditures because they would have had no reason not to coordinate. I feel like I've not answered your question. I'm not sure.
I'm fine. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Thank you, Delegate Hill. Next, I see Delegate Feldmark's hand is up. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Delegate, for this bill. My question was sort of prompted by that last exchange, and I'm looking at the bill to try to see how, when you discuss coordination and, if that constitutes an in-kind contribution, how are in-kind contributions addressed here in the bill?
Let me grab that really
Because
quickly.
I don't remember, and I'm trying to read quickly. I'm not seeing it.
Okay, I believe that they are covered. Oh, sorry, I believe they're covered in the by contributions, but if they're not, that is a mistake and will be fixed. But that should be covering in-kind contributions as well. You certainly, being on that committee, would know more about that language than I would, and I will make sure that it covers in-kind. But that is my understanding and my discussions with the attorneys is that it does cover those, but it is interesting point that you're making. I will make sure it does.
So I think you're right in the definition of donation. Actually, it says or transfer of money or other thing of value. So
Okay, that would cover it. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I was missing that. Thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, go ahead, Delegate Feldmark.
Thank you. Sorry, this is really not a question specifically, but when last year's bill was in committee, one of the issues that I discussed that I'd like to raise with the delegation as well is, if we as the delegation are going to start legislating around village elections, then in my mind, one of the most fundamental things we should address is democratizing them and expanding voting rights. So I actually have an amendment in process, and actually I'm working on a separate bill as well, but wanted to raise that for discussion. Currently in most of the villages, it is one vote per property. And, you know, homes with multiple adults either, you know, reach consensus or someone votes first, or if there's disagreement, that could be a reason not to vote. And I think that in elections where we really want to see greater participation, I think making these more democratic is important.
Mr. Chairman, can I
Okay.
respond to that?
Yeah, briefly, and then we're going to wrap this up because we all have to get to the floor.
So briefly, thank you, Delegate Farmark, for that suggestion and also for giving me heads up about that. You know, I think that's an important discussion to have, and I absolutely can see supporting that idea. I don't see it as part of this bill. I see it as a separate piece of legislation, but I really appreciate that as being part of the discussion. I think this is about the reporting requirements, but democratizing any election process is something I could get behind.
Okay. All right. It looks like we are pretty much at time here, and I think all of us have to run to the House or Senate floor. So more to come and more to discuss on this bill. I think I will entertain a motion to adjourn for now.
So
So
moved. Second.
All right. Sounds good. Any objections? Seeing no objections, we'll adjourn for now. We'll reconvene next